I like that, Travis. Invest local too. Definitely. Well, since we're going to just chat for a minute, then I'm going to go ahead and get started and people can come in. So I am Patty Koval. I know everybody so far, so don't have to introduce myself, but I do want to thank everybody for coming today. And we're really excited about having this opportunity to talk with community foundations in particular about impact investing and those opportunities. So without taking any more of our valuable time here, I'm going to turn it over to our very capable co-chairs, Sari Raskin and Terry McNally, for them to introduce our speakers and help us get things started. So thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you, Patty. It's so good to see everybody here today. I think this is going to be a great session and a scary one. Every time I hear about impact investing, I think, oh, this is so great. But then I get lost in all the details. And I know that both Travis and Lisa will be able to help explain this in a way that we can each think about some donors that we might have. Even during our first session, talking to Travis and Lisa, I started thinking about, oh, there's this person, there's this organization, and trying to put things together. So I hope that you all will be able to also find some connections and learn about what's going on with impact investing and how community foundations can work. I'm going to start with Travis Green. He's Vice President of LOCUS, Local Investment Strategy, and he was at the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group and works now really trying to build the impact investing locally. And Lisa O'Mara, who I've worked with forever, it feels like, is Vice President of Local Investment Strategy at LOCUS. And she also was at a community foundation, at the Community Foundation in Richmond. And I have personal knowledge that she is very, very good with working with donors, and just thrilled to see both of you guys here. So we have a big day, so let everybody get started.
Well, thank you all. I think we didn't miss anybody, did we? So I was going to go ahead and have Travis and I just introduce. Oh, no, you guys already met us. I'm so used to us introducing ourselves. Thank you, Patty, for the intro. So I guess what I'm going to do is share my slide deck. So give me one sec. We do have some slides that we want to go through. We will have lots of time for questions. And I'm going to give a heads up to Scott. And if we also have anybody else show up who says that they have done this work, we might ask you later to share what you've done so far. So just giving you a little bit of fair warning. So before I get into this, can everybody see my deck?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So you heard about Travis and I. We wanted to tell you a little bit really quickly about who is LOCUS Impact Investing, because we are a unique kind of organization. We are a mission-driven nonprofit consulting firm. And so our mission is to really help foundations, and especially community foundations nationally, to get more capital flowing in their place through the tool of local impact investing. We help foundations to learn about the tool, build strategies and programs, and then move into actually making investments. And then we can also handhold at that part with figuring out what an investment looks like, servicing your investments, all sorts of things, even beyond the point of getting your program up and running. So we are a soup to nuts, working across the country. And currently we've been in existence for 5 years. We've worked with 38 community foundations around the country. We've also worked with private foundations, health conversion foundations, and some other mission-driven investors. And you can see a couple of our clients on that list right there. We are a part of VCC Social Enterprises, which is headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, but we're a completely virtual office. We decided after 2 years of working remotely and seeing how well it worked that we weren't going back. And so, although I'm based in Richmond still, Travis is up in DC, and about half of our team is around the country. And about, we have 15 people on staff now, and I'd say 5 to 6 are in the Richmond area and others are around the country. So we already went through our question of where are you on your journey? I'd be interested to hear who in your organization is asking questions about this practice. And maybe if you can just put your number in the chat. Are the staff interested in this? Is it being driven by your executive or your CEO? Are board members talking to you about it? Donors? Anybody else? I'll just wait 1 second and give you a minute to put your number in the chat. So yeah, all over the place. I think that's pretty normal. We do find these questions come from all parts of the organization. Usually if the board members are asking about it is when those foundations start moving a little more quickly. But we think it's great that more and more donors are also asking the question about this, and that staff like yourselves are wanting to know what's going on. So let's jump into the meat of it. What is local impact investing? And Travis, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about our definitions.
Thank you, Lisa. And it is such an honor to be here with you all. I would say it's a privilege because normally when Lisa and I do this, we're talking about making communities better in Minnesota or New York State or Washington State. And the prospect of Virginia foundations doing this work more wholeheartedly is, I think, really exciting to us. So I'm going to say a little bit about what impact investing is, what it isn't, why are foundations doing it, when did they start doing it, and what are the different motivations along the way that they're encountering to become local impact investors. I'll start by just quickly saying that impact investing is just a tool, right? It's a tool that foundations use to accomplish their mission. It's in that sense like policy advocacy, it's like grant making, it's like convening the other work that a foundation does. And I think hopefully that removes a little bit of the mystery of it, right? This is a tool that a foundation can use, or it's a tool that a foundation can decide not to use. Let me differentiate, though, local impact investing from the other kinds of impact investing that you might be hearing about. So impact investing field is a huge field. Some estimates put it at about $30 trillion of assets currently. And I think that that's a bit deceptive because a lot of the money, that $30 trillion is not reaching my community, right? If there's that much money out there doing good things, why aren't our communities prospering? Well, that's partly because there's a lot of things included in impact investing that aren't local impact investing. The field includes things like divesting, and that means selling or screening out assets from your portfolio that may be detrimental in an environmental or social or governance screen. You know, foundations sometimes say we don't want to own companies that produce carbon, or we don't want to own companies that don't have women represented on their board. A lot of health conversion foundations say we don't want to own tobacco companies, right? So this is a huge segment of the impact investing field. Next, we have activist investing. And this is when an institution goes out and intentionally buys a stock in a company in which they want to kind of influence decisions. You might see a foundation do this in a company that they want to eliminate a particular chemical manufacturing process that produces a carcinogen, or sometimes this is used kind of around geopolitical events. There was activist investing to try to get companies to stop working with apartheid South Africa. So that's a strategy that foundations can use, but it's less related to what we're going to talk about today. Third, some foundations practice topical investing, and that means going out and proactively buying funds, stocks, bonds that generate a financial return, but also fulfill some mission goal, right? So you can go out and buy a fund that is in health-focused companies, or you can go out and buy a green energy fund, right? And so there are more and more of these products out there that can help foundations accomplish their mission. The last area, and this is the area that we're really going to talk about today, and I think has the greatest resonance with community foundations, is this idea of local investing. And that's putting capital into local companies, organizations, or funds with the intention of generating a measurable community benefit alongside financial returns, right? So traditional partners in these investments might be local credit unions, local finance institutions that are in the business of lending or supporting sectors in your economy. Food is one common example. And Lisa, if you go to the next slide, just expand on that definition a little bit. I think it's so helpful to say this again, and particularly with board members, because I think for somebody who's spent a lifetime focusing on grant making, this can be a big shift, right? That these need to generate a financial return to the foundation. It doesn't have to be a market rate financial return, but the idea of these investments is that they create that financial return along with some measurable social return or community benefit. To provide a couple of examples of this, you typically need a stream of revenue to repay your foundation, right? So maybe making a loan to a nonprofit that bills or receives reimbursement for services. That might be a good loan recipient. Loaning to a nonprofit that has regular donor giving, but they have a construction project that they want to get underway, or a program that they want to get off the ground before they have all the donors lined up. Mortgage payments for a facility, right? I'm going to purchase this facility today, but I'm going to pay for it over time. That's an instance where financing might be helpful in your community. And then also in the case where an organization comes to you and says, hey, my costs would be significantly reduced at this piece of equipment, but I don't have the money today to. That might be an instance of you making an impact investment in your place. So next slide. So this impressions may be that this is a new and novel way of doing, but the reality is that this has been happening in community philanthropy for over 50 years. The first institution that I'm aware of that did this was the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, starting in 1971. And they started making these kinds of investments kind of one-on-one with donors at their foundation. That kind of led to the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation founding the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund in 1983. The desire to have a local investment partner that they could put capital in to deploy capital across the state. And that's an example of a CDFI being born, a community development financial institution being born by a community foundation. And maybe like some of you, that nonprofit operated from their basement for the first few years of existence. You know, there are a lot of dates I could talk about on here, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Initiative Foundations, which were created by McKnight in the 1980s. These were community foundations meant to serve rural Minnesota, and they behave in many ways like traditional community foundations, but they also make community loans. So these are community foundations that make loans to small businesses, help businesses expand, help businesses move into kind of adjacent towns. So they've been doing this in rural communities in Minnesota since the 1980s. In 2001, the Steuben County Community Foundation in Indiana realized their community wasn't getting connected to the internet, so they built a fiber optic network, and that was their endowment. They actually took the payments for the fiber optic services and then used that to make grants in their community. And then in 2005, a community foundation prototyped the Keep It Giving program, which is the idea that you give an asset to the foundation like a farm, and rather than the foundation selling that asset, the foundation, in this case, Southwest Minnesota, kept that farm operating for the benefit of the community, but then also used the revenue from that farm to support its grant making. These moments in the kind of the community foundation journey in impact investing kind of lay over these other movements in community philanthropy that you may have seen, right? The growth of DAFs in the late 90s and the early 2000s, this growing centrality of community leadership in your work, and this move to thinking of yourselves as anchor institutions that are in your community for the long haul, there to support kind of thriving economies for your place, right? Impact investing has been maturing with these different community philanthropy movements over the last 50 years. Next slide. And also, if anybody has any questions, please just interrupt me or just, you know, shout out, because I don't follow the chat, but I don't want your questions to go unanswered. Our estimate is that today, of the 800, 900,000, I don't know what the current number is, community foundations across the United States, that about 1 in 10 or 10% are currently local impact investors in one way or another. And as the previous kind of history slide shows, these aren't all really big, huge staffed foundations. You have, like in Steuben, a small one-county community foundation in rural Indiana operating a broadband network, right? So you have small and large foundations doing this. You have rural and urban, but critically rural, right? Where these might be the only institutions that can do some of these things. You have single community, but also statewide foundations doing this work, and we'll get to some of our stories that highlight that. And then foundations like New Hampshire that have been doing this for 50 years. And then Lisa and I just worked with 8 foundations across Indiana that have started doing this in the last, well, some of them are not quite yet doing it, but hopefully deploying capital this year or early in 2023. Next slide. All right, so we've talked about the who and the when, but I think it's important to talk about the why, right? So what is motivating foundations to do this work? And as some of you all put in the chat, right, some foundations, donors and board members are starting to ask questions about this, right? And this may be because their perceptions of what is impactful philanthropy is different than maybe it was a generation ago, right? Where endowing an organization for a lifetime or more may have been the priority. But now a donor may want to have the biggest impact in a short term as possible in their community, right? So there are different ways of thinking about impact in place that are certainly starting to appear among donors and board members. The second thing is that some community challenges just require tools other than grants, right? So, that you all would know better this. There's a lot of things that you can accomplish through grants, but there might be things like housing or facilities in your place, or even sector development strategies or entrepreneurship or Main Street development, downtown development, where the dollar value of that investment is so significant that you have to use investable assets rather than grants to accomplish some of that work. And for some, investing is just a better strategy to do that kind of work in your community. Third, community needs surpass grant resources. And I say this with community foundations a lot, but how often are your grant requests exceeding your capacity to make grants in your community? And it's almost all the time when I talk to folks. So the idea of impact investing might be a way that the foundation can take a little money from over here, from your investable assets, to deploy for impact to complement your grant making efforts in your place, right? This is a way to do more with the same amount that you have. Finally, and there's a great example of this from Arizona, strategic investments unlock capital. In Arizona, there was a recognition from USDA Rural Development that the state wasn't taking down their full allocation of rural development resources. And so the community foundation came to the table and said, what if we gave rural communities small investments to get, basically bridge loans so that they could complete the applications that they need so that they can then get the USDA money. And so they've grown a huge pipeline in Arizona of small philanthropic investments that have brought down annually something like $40 million from the federal government for their communities. So your investment unlocks this other capital for your place. Next slide. All right, Lisa.
Thanks. So what does it take to become this local impact investor? We have really two big buckets that we've seen in our experience with community foundations over the last couple of years. And one is not going to be a surprise to you. It really takes this community leadership culture within your organization, that you're outward facing, that you are engaged in the community, that you are valuing and things are bubbling up from the community that are causing you and impacting your strategies internally, that you're not so internally focused anymore. And I do think that this is a movement amongst community foundations nationally that's been around long enough that, I know most community foundations in Virginia take this approach. And we really think that this is a valuable place to start from because of the way impact investing happens, where it needs to be informed by partners in the community. And often you are co-investing with others in the community. And so having this approach and your board buying into this approach is really important, we think, as a starting place. Our second bucket is that it takes process and planning and policy and agreement. And this is really the focus of the work that we do with foundations when building a program. The reason we put this in a big circle is we know this is not a linear process. Every foundation comes to the table with a different set of assets, and not just financial assets, but experiences, knowledge, expectations of board members. And in some cases, some foundations have actually done investments. And then they're going back and saying, that was opportunistic. We did this one investment, but now we want to come back and actually build the program. So we see that more often than you might think. So the pieces of the impact investing system that we help foundations address are the strategic impact focus. So what is it you want to do with your local impact investing program? What is it that you can't do right now that this tool is going to allow you to do in and for your community? The capitalization source and method. So where are the dollars going to come from? This is a really important conversation for a foundation to have with your board, and figuring out not only where is the money going to come from, but how much are we willing to put into this practice? Capital uses is what are the types of investments you're going to entertain? Because there is an array of different ways that your local investments can show up. So what is your ideal? And then what are the other ways you might consider? For example, some foundations, I don't think we give this example, Baltimore Community Foundation only works through intermediaries. So they are in a large urban area. They have a lot of CDFIs that they can partner with, and they have chosen that that's the way that they will interact and get their money out the door, rather than doing direct investment, which some communities may not have that luxury of having that many partners at the ready. So that's important. Governance. So who's going to oversee these assets? Does this still fall under the investment committee, who's really focused on the traditional market investments and the highest, best return financially? It's a different mindset to be weighing impact and risk and financial return. And so do you need a different governance committee and a different way of deciding and making decisions about those assets? Policy is an area. So, every foundation has an investment policy statement. And so we also believe it's very important to have a policy statement for your local investments, because it is going to be different than how you're looking at your traditional investments. And so we work with foundations to get those parameters down in writing so that you have a document from which to govern from. And then, of course, sourcing and staffing and resourcing and deciding where is this going to live, who's going to be responsible for it, who's talking to people in the community to find potential investments, who is doing your back office and actually doing the paperwork for all of that and the loan agreements. So there's a lot of pieces and parts in the system, and that when it all comes together is your local impact investing program. So Travis and I have a couple of examples we're going to go through just to show you what this looks like at some other community foundations. And then we will definitely open up for Q&A in just a little bit. So jot down your questions if we've caused you to think of any yet. So I wanted to talk about the Community Foundation of St. Clair County, which is a community foundation in Michigan. They have about 300 funds and 80 million in assets. So their foundation currently has an investment policy statement that allows them to invest up to 5% of their investable assets. So basically up to 5% of their endowed pool that's in the market, they can draw down as needed to do investments locally. And their goal is to eventually get to a $3.5 million local impact investing pool. I will say that's not where they started. So they got into this local impact investing quite a while ago and actually piloted their program using some grant dollars at first to get their feet wet, but quickly learned that there was great opportunity in their community and loved the idea of putting dollars out into the community that actually recycled and came back and could be used over and over again. So they quickly decided, this is a practice we want to adopt, and went for the 5%. We like sharing this story because they also have an interesting approach, which may resonate with you a bit, is that they have an angel investor circle. So they have a number of donors who come together. It's like a giving circle. All the members put in $1,500 a year, but those dollars are then pooled to do investments in the community. And so they meet and they consider potential investments. The group is doing a little bit riskier investments than the Community Foundation does. They look at startup companies and want a early seed stage, sort of almost venture capital approach. But they can do that because they are contributing to it on a regular basis, and they're vetting it with that lens. The foundation really loves having that tool. This group of donors who are considering these investments annually to augment what they're also doing. And it's also great for storytelling in the community. An example of one of the biggest investments that they've made today is the Community Foundation partnered with the local community college. Community college needed more housing. There was a hotel in downtown that was empty, and the downtown and economic development folks really wanted to bring more people into the downtown and get more foot traffic. And so the foundation ended up lending the community college $700,000 to renovate this hotel. And now they've got community college students living there in the downtown, going to new restaurants, and just a lot more activity happening there on their waterfront. The neat thing, and the CEO of this community foundation always likes to point out, is that, it was really unusual for folks in town to see redevelopment happening with a giant sign that said financed by the Community Foundation. That was a big culture shift for the community, and a great way to have the people who live in the area start thinking about the Community Foundation as a different kind of player. We're always, and I hope at some point you get to meet this guy. He's fantastic. A second example I want to share is the Community Foundation for Grant County. So this is one of those Indiana community foundations that Travis and I said we've been working with. For those of you who don't know, in Indiana, there's a community foundation in almost every county. So it's really, the foundations tend to be smaller in asset size and hyper-focused on their county issues. So Grant County Community Foundation has 400 funds, 28 million in assets. They recently adopted a policy to spend up to 10% of their invested assets for local impact investments. And one of their first investments was this partnership with the Athena Credit Union. And this was a program to counteract the payday lending that was happening in their county. You all are familiar with how awful payday loans are, and people can get in a really awful cycle of having to owe more and more and more. So this was to try to address that problem in their community. The Community Foundation put $1 million deposit at the credit union. The credit union then used that money as collateral. So it's called a guarantee. So they used that as collateral for the credit union to make microloans to individuals in their community. And this was really targeted for low-income individuals who had credit scores, that wouldn't allow them to normally be able to get a loan from the credit union. But knowing that this $1 million was there as sort of backup, if these individuals didn't repay the loan, that the credit union could tap into the Community Foundation's dollars to make themselves whole, was what allowed the credit union to be able to make these loans. There's a financial education piece to this as well. Not only do these individuals get these loans, the credit union used it as a way to help them create a banking relationship. Because as you know, many individuals in these situations that are using these payday loans don't have a bank that, a banking relationship, they're unbanked. So with the loan, a portion of that was put into a savings account. And there were financial literacy programs that they could engage with And so as they were paying back the loan, they also had this new savings account that was being created on their behalf. So it's really neat program and a unique way to address this problem with payday lenders. This started just before the epidemic. And we have heard recently from the executive director at the foundation that one of their payday lending offices has closed. So they're thrilled. They see that as a success, as well as the loans, the fact that they've shut one of those down. I think, Travis, you were gonna do a couple of.
Yeah. So just two more stories that we wanted to take you through. I'll take you to Kansas. This is a community that's about an hour northwest of Wichita. In Hutchinson, there is a community foundation getting on the larger side, but it's really led by a dynamic leader who kind of uses that community leadership framework in her work. She has been focused on housing quality in the community and improving the housing stock in the community. She's been focused on placemaking in their downtown, and she's very active in their chamber. In her kind of day job with nonprofits, she was approached by one of their regular partners, but rather than a grant request, and did I just turn off my video? I apologize. I don't know why I did that. But I still don't have my video. Rather than making a kind of a standard grant request, this nonprofit asked for several $100,000 of grants from the foundation, and she just said we can't do that, but maybe we could do an investment instead. And in this case, the nonprofit said, okay, well, yeah, maybe that'll work. And in this case, the foundation worked with a couple of donors and used a little bit of their endowment to make the investment to create 12 housing units right in their downtown core, so that more people were living there, more people were walking there, and it activated a key part of the community. This experiment for this foundation budded into a strategy to deploy 5% of their investable assets across the foundation. And they've made other investments, like at the beginning of the pandemic, they helped a business trench Wi-Fi that increased broadband access in their community, trench fiber, so that they could increase internet access in their community. Next, I'll take you to Arkansas. Arkansas Community Foundation, to many of us, may seem like a quite large community foundation. This is a $500 million community foundation. But if you were to talk to their staff, they would say, well, we don't have a lot. And that's because a lot of Arkansas's assets are tied up in donor advised funds. The foundation has very little discretionary dollars. And I think when we talked to them, they really hadn't made loans as a foundation above $5,000, except for when donors wanted it, right? So a community foundation with a lot of assets, but not a lot to make impact with by the staff, at least. In this case, the community foundation did look at its investments, and there are some fantastic community development financial institutions in Arkansas: Southern Bancorp, Hope Credit Union, and the foundation made a decision to take $2 million, initially with the support of a donor, to invest in these local institutions and help small business lending in and across the state. This experiment was a success, and the board has decided to expand the amount of investable assets that are available for local impact investing. But they also, given their work with donors, thought it was important to include donors kind of proactively in this process. And so it created a specific kind of DAF that was just for committing assets to impact investing. So somebody would say they want to do impact investing, they establish this kind of DAF. There's a minimum, there's a lockup period for that investment. And then at the end of the life of the investment, the donor can convert the DAF into a traditional DAF to make gifts out of the foundation. So another example of a community foundation doing this work.
I'll go ahead and wrap up our presentation. Travis and I did want to give you really some actionable next steps. And so before we get into our Q&A, we wanted to share these with you as your takeaways. And then we do want to open up the floor for conversation and questions. So, you know, if you're thinking after hearing this presentation, like, that sounds pretty cool, you know, we might be able to do that. What do I do next? So a couple ideas we had is talk to your board chair, you know, find out if he or she is familiar with this practice. Do they want to start learning maybe with you, going to some webinars, attending some things to learn more about it, looking at Mission Investors Exchange or other websites. I wouldn't say the LOCUS website yet, we're redoing ours, but soon that'll be a resource that we would send you to. But that might be a good place to start, just to see what the receptivity is to that idea and if this is a concept that they have heard about. Connecting with peers in the field. You know, I know that we all compare, community foundations are always looking to see how you're comparing to your peers. So if you want some introductions to community foundations like yours in other parts of the country, or ones that we know are doing programs that we feel like are similar to you, we're happy to make those introductions, or you all can continue this conversation, you know, now that you've seen each other and know who has an interest in this. It could be something you all could do together. Join VFN. I think I had to say that or Patty would get really mad. Join VFN for their impact investing affinity group. I'm not sure what you all call them, learning groups. And Sari, I know, is going to tell us later about when that those webinars are going to be, but there is a group that is forming through VFN to talk very specifically about impact investing. And then we're always happy to talk. So Travis and I, you can tell we love to talk. So let us know if we can have a conversation with you, with your board, you know, do some introduction to the concepts. We're always happy to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing.